Hey, everybody, welcome back to LaFlamme Throwers. We are going to do a hot take. As you know, Frog, Steve, and myself, we have some of our opinions on sports. Steve has an interesting opinion on the downfall of Andy Dalton. Steve, first of all, let me ask you, where does Andy Dalton rank in the greatest all-time Bengals quarterback discussion?
So that's a great question. I think most people agree that in the history of the Bengals, dating back, 40 plus years, 50 plus years, there are pretty much four quarterbacks that people talk about when it comes to the all-time greats. And that's Ken Anderson, Boomer Esiason, Carson Palmer, and Andy Dalton. My own personal opinion, I would slide, Andy's our career passing leader, but I think from an achievement standpoint, I think that he would slide in at the number 3 spot. I think that Kenny Anderson and Boomer Esiason each took their teams to Super Bowls, and that puts you on a different level. But I would certainly put Andy above Carson Palmer in the number 3 spot when it comes to all-time Bengals quarterbacks.
Now, Steve, let me ask you, is this just a little bit of sour grapes considering the comments Carson Palmer's made going up to this draft, or is that your true heartfelt feelings?
No, that's my true heartfelt feelings. I'll tell you, and part of it is makeup. And we didn't, the interview that we did with Ricky recently, that I hope everybody's had a chance to watch by now. One of my favorite takes of his was his story about sports and the fact that you're born into your sports teams. And it means so much more. And the fact that the Midwest is cut from a different cloth. Carson wasn't wired that way. So frankly, if you look at Carson's achievements, I think he certainly had more physical talent than Andy Dalton did. But if you look at his achievements, he made the playoffs twice in the years that he was here. And Andy made the playoffs 5 times in the time that he was with Cincinnati. So no, I don't think there's a lot of bias there. I think that Carson's mental makeup was a problem when it comes to the Bengals. I don't think he was happy here. And I get it, Midwest, flyover country, etc. But Carson's a California guy. He wasn't the most vocal leader with the Bengals, but he certainly had a lot of physical talent. It was very tough for me to stomach when he basically said he's going to take his ball and go home. He was going to retire if the Bengals didn't trade him. It's difficult for me to envision somebody being a successful leader when they have that in them at all. There are a lot of different ways to handle being quote unquote upset with the franchise. If you look at what the Bengals did to pacify Carson, whether it was bringing in Terrell Owens at Carson's request, giving Carson a heavy choice in the draft every year. At the end of the day, according to Carson's own documentary, the only thing that really pissed him off was the fact that they let John Kitna go, who was a mentor to him. I get it, but it's business, man. This is business. Frog uses the term, it's a grown man's business pretty frequently, and I love that. I don't think Carson was a strong guy from a leadership perspective. I don't think his achievements were that great. When he talked about Bengals fans throwing trash on his lawn towards later years, his neighbors in Indian Hill, a very prestigious part of Cincinnati, have gone on record by saying they never saw that happen. So it's not personal with Carson, but he doesn't get any points from me in the leadership department. He led one of 2 Bengals teams in the past 30 years that I think had real Super Bowl potential in 2005 before he was injured. But yeah, that's not sour grapes. I really think Andy Dalton has a more impressive track record than Carson did during his time in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I think Steve touched on it. And there's going to be a whole nother discussion with us in the future about business for like how players can have to use their voice through maybe some of the means might not be the best. But I really feel like when a player is really invested into the community feels that. And with the everybody knew when you drafted Burrow at 1, Dalton would either have to take a major salary and ego cut to still be with the team, or they were going to cut him, and maybe they were just going to cut him regardless. The Cincinnati community really felt Andy Dalton and rooted for him and might have wished a little bit better play on Sundays. Whereas for Carson, nobody ever felt that. And we as fans, we're smart. Like, we can tell when somebody's really aligned with the community, even if they're not from there. I mean, there's just so many examples. for us in the Midwest, where people decide to make it their home, and we love it. And even if they move back to their original places, when they come back, they're treated like royalty. You know, from a Browns perspective, Clay Matthews, who doesn't keep his home in Cleveland, like we're just loving him. Hell, we're still loving Ozzie, and he was our GM of our nemesis because when he was in Cleveland, he was vested. And I believe Steve's take is spot on, and also performance. I think Dalton's numbers are better.
That's a great point, Frog. And I mean, hit the nail on the head. And I can tell you that everyone in Cincinnati, and I would hope people around the league, I'll certainly include Buffalo in this, with the love they showed Andy Dalton from a donation perspective when we beat Baltimore to help Buffalo get into the playoffs. Everyone in town knows Andy Dalton. I've personally met him at the local Starbucks a couple times. Nicest guy in the world. Everybody knows what his wife looks like, who she is, because she's so active in the community. Carson wasn't wired that way. You know, his wife wasn't wired that way. He did a couple of promotions for a meat company and a chili company in town that he got paid for, but you didn't hear about Carson really trying to roll his sleeves up and help. And there's no one that can really doubt that Andy Dalton is one of the best human beings we've ever had come through town. He and his wife, Jordan, did so much from a charitable perspective. But yeah, Frog is 100% correct. They were good citizens, and everybody appreciates that. So I know the whole city, up to Mike Brown, who penned a personal letter to Andy Dalton, wishing him the best and how much it hurt to release him, says I need to know. Yeah, I think Frog nailed it from a character perspective. Yeah, Andy was a much better corporate citizen in the city.
And the point of this, Steve, was actually you had a very interesting take about one draft that really led to the downfall of Andy Dalton. And I'd love to get your take on that. And then after, get Frog's take on how a bad draft or two bad drafts really impacts a franchise. So, Steve, which draft led to the downfall of Andy Dalton?
Yeah, Kitch. So as a Bengals fan, the 2015 draft, you could argue, was the worst in the history of our franchise. And I'm going to love to hear Frog's take on how much a bad draft or a couple of bad drafts can hurt you. Because whether it was, the responsibility of Marvin Lewis or, anybody else, if you look at what happened to Andy, he came into the league, his first year was 2011, made the playoffs every year through 2015 as a rookie starter all the way through 2015. But then take a look at our 2015 draft. Frog, I'm going to be curious to hear when you start how important those first couple picks are. But if you look at how the Bengals whiffed in 2015, we tried to make a great investment. And Kitch, I remember having this conversation with you after we made these two draft picks, because we talked about the Bengals being such a great drafting franchise that they could just, spend their first few picks on insurance for down the road. Our first two draft picks in 2015 were Cedric Ogbuehi out of Texas A&M and Jake Fisher out of Oregon, both offensive linemen. And we expected that to be our offensive line of the future. To the point where a year or two later, we let Andrew Whitworth walk and we let Kevin Zeitler walk, our two best linemen, because we thought that we had drafted our future. Neither player is with the team anymore. They were both epic failures. And it's an experiment that I think absolutely hamstrung Andy. Not only did you miss with what you thought was going to be the key of your offensive line, you let your good players walk. And if you look at the Lewis regime, they didn't another draft pick on an offensive lineman. The next year, they didn't draft a lineman until the 5th round with Christian Westerman out of Arizona State, who's already out of the league. They didn't draft any linemen in 2017. And then moving forward to 2018, we tried to spend our first-round pick on Billy Price out of Ohio State. I love the Buckeyes, but that pick's a bust. It's impossible to paint it any other way. So if you look at the drafting choices that we made from 2015 on, there was no help and no attention paid to that offensive line, and we missed on the targets we tried to get, and we let our good players walk. I think that you can blame the Bengals as a franchise, frankly, for those drafting choices. Love Joe Burrow. I'm glad it got us where we are, because I think that we're going to have the best quarterback in the history of our franchise, and the Bengals are now doing what they really need to do from spending money on free agency, et cetera, turn it around. But man, that few year stretch from 2015 through, frankly, 2019, I think it absolutely killed Andy. And I wouldn't be shocked one bit if we watch him go to a different team and do really, really well.
Yeah, I'll jump in regards to where it can really hurt you and hamstring you is, and I'll be very quick, is when you take offensive linemen high, it's the physical investment, like you're putting draft capital so it didn't go to someone else. And then the other thing is, like, you want to give people time to see if they can develop. An offensive line takes a little bit more time to see if they can develop. It's not as quick as maybe a skill position guy. So you're going to spend that time. You already spent the resources, and then you got to then allocate your money differently because you're expecting them to possibly play when you take them in the first, second round. You need to see them play. And you do let good veterans go, but you were also envisioning we may have to let these veterans go, but then we can allocate these money and resources towards other needs and priorities. And that's where you can just, unfortunately, can find yourself chasing. And we said a lot of nice things about Andy Dalton, but I think the one thing that was very evident is he was a win-with player. If everything's in line, you want with him. But he wasn't a win because like the great ones, and it's not fair to put him on a win because. And that's where, when everything wasn't aligned perfectly, the fall off.
You're right.
Two questions for you, Frog. Number one, how quickly do you realize you've missed on a player, specifically an offensive lineman? And the second question, is there an institutional memory that teams have when, say, you've drafted a couple of misses on the offensive line? Are you more likely to go away from that because you feel gun shy?
Wow, your second question is great. And the good one, and the first one's good too. All right, so when do you realize that you felt like you might have missed or might not be a good fit for you in your current situation? Because sometimes you might let a first or second round or a third round offensive lineman go early, and then they were able to play a career. But you can kind of get that sense like it's not a fit, I believe, after the second season. Hopefully they had the same O-line coach for 2 years because that helps. But if they've had different O-line coaches, you can maybe want to ride out another year. Like, hey, maybe it could be the communication. Can the person play another position? Is the O-line coach receptive of moving that tackle to guard, or that guard to have flexibility to have to be like maybe your offensive lineman to play tackle center if they're smart enough? All those things, I believe in a couple years you can figure that out. As far as institutional gun shy, we're human beings that are making these picks, and it would be foolish of us to not think, hey, we busted at this selection or at this type of body or at this university. Do we want to go down that road again? And I guarantee you, I've been in a lot of different draft meetings, different places. We've said that. Now, did it really make us not draft due to possibly mistakes in the past? That wasn't the overriding thing. There's a culmination of process. But yes, we have said those things. We've missed on a Penn State defensive lineman. Are you sure you want to do this? Or we missed on this type of player. Are you sure you want to do this? And then we would continue to have a very long discussion. You're not like point A equals point B and no more discussion. So very good question on the second part.
So Frog, I've got I think a very quick and simple question, but how would you grade? So going back to that 2015 draft for the Bengals, I think it's so bad. I would love it if you would put a letter grade on this. They had 8 picks in 7 rounds. Okay. I'm going to read them real quickly. Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher, Tyler Croft, PJ Dawson, Josh Shaw, Marcus Hardison, CJ Uzama, Darren Smith, and Mario Alford. Out of those 8 picks in 7 rounds, 1 player is still on the team, and that's CJ Uzoma, tight end, our 5th round pick from that year, who I would say is a slightly above average tight end, but good enough to still be on the team. 8 picks in 7 rounds. 7 out of those 8 picks are no longer on the team less than 5 years later. How do you grade that from a scout perspective?
You would have to give yourself enough. Like to have one person that's a backup out of that, then yeah, that's enough. Now, if you had like one person that was on your team 5 years later, that one person's Tom freaking Brady, then you give yourself an A+ forever. But that's an extreme outlier. But you did a very good job of painting that picture. if I am a scout for a team and we fast forward 5 years later and we only have one player on our team and he's not impact, then you have to feel like, yeah, we missed on this draft. What can we do to get better? And that's fine. Like, we all miss. And also, we also have to be cognizant of the fact of sometimes we cut people because we can get better, but the Bengals picked first this year. So they picked first this year.
Mm-hmm.
And those things add up. They really do.
All right, guys, that was awesome. Steve, great research on that. For all great takes. We will be back. Keep tuned. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.